From east to west, heat gripped the country today. Take a look at Labrador City, where it got up to 29. That is 10 degrees higher than average, and it felt like 33. And that stretched all the way west to Kelowna and Vancouver, where the mercury soared into the 30s. Well, CBC meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff has been tracking the heat for us from our Vancouver newsroom. We heard that farmer Joe say just a moment ago that this year seems hotter than normal. Is it?
Well, Ian, I mean, it's not unusual to have heat waves across the country in our summer months, but this has been an exceptionally sweltering start to the summer season, almost from coast to coast. And in fact, it's this average of extremes that make up our seasonal temperatures. But I was looking at some of the major cities from Fredericton through Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, and out towards Calgary and Vancouver. And most major cities in the east and the west coming in 1 to 3 degrees above our normal for June and half of July. So this has been a hot and a long start to the summer season, but it's not just the temperatures and the length of that heat, it's how far-reaching this hot and humid air mass is. A lot of that has to do with the blocking patterns that have been in place, sort of locking that heat in, allowing the air to cook for days. And that is a trend that is continuing with climate change, Ian.
So, Johanna, how long is this going to last?
Well, there's some good indication that the eastern half of the country will actually return to a more seasonal outlook for the next few months. We're looking at a building El Nino, which normally means warmer than normal temperatures for much of the country, but that trend is really just set in place for the west. So Alberta, British Columbia, our summer may have only just begun, and while it has been a slower start to fire season, that is of big concern, with an outlook for July, August, and into September that looks to come in above seasonal. But for Ontario, Quebec, and out towards Atlantic Canada, temperatures should return to a more seasonal pattern after 3 rounds of heat waves to kick off the year. And Central Canada looks like seasonal will continue to be the story.
Always nice having you on the show. Thanks, Johanna.
You're welcome.
When a heat wave strikes, working outdoors can be miserable, and that's not the worst of it. There are serious health hazards, and some people are more vulnerable than others. Nicole Ireland looks at new research to find our personal limits.
After 3 hours of exercising in 36-degree heat while wearing a uniform, Louis Leclerc has a new appreciation for people who work outside every day.
Those have to be some of the hardest jobs to do when it's really warm.
Leclerc is a volunteer at the University of Ottawa, where scientists simulate the heat and exertion that outdoor workers experience. They've found that older workers are often more susceptible to heat stress.
And what's most important to understand is that as we age, we see that there's an impairment in our body's ability to dissipate heat.
That's partly because as people get into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, they don't produce as much sweat. Sweating is essential to cooling down the body.
So for these individuals, that means that as they're doing any kind of work, whether they're doing physical activity or whether they're sitting in the heat, that means that their body will slowly store more heat.
That puts older workers at greater risk of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, which can be deadly. But how someone reacts to heat also depends on other factors, such as how well they slept that night or how many days they've been working in the heat. So researchers are trying to come up with a way to measure heat stress in real time.
You can see here.
They're working with various companies, including Smart Cone Technologies, to develop equipment that monitors outdoor workers. It tracks data like age, health conditions, blood pressure, and the number of consecutive days they've been exposed to heat, then factors in the weather to predict their risk. Ultimately, they hope to develop wearable sensors for each worker to warn when the heat is getting to be too much.
There's no way that you can have just one heat stress monitoring for everybody. It has to be individualized.
Until that happens, researchers say it's important for employers and governments to realize older workers are generally at higher risk, a risk that will climb along with the temperature. Nicole Ireland, CBC News, Toronto.